All right, we are live for take 2 of Thanatophobia. Everyone, thank you for your patience. Um, we are going to get back. Matt was just talking about the book that he was reading, or the book that he saw on the website that he didn't realize that gentleman was an author and had written a book. It wasn't available to him before, and I believe Iron Chariot had a question for him.
Yep. So I just wanted to say real quick that when I originally looked at the doctor's website, mortals.be, he didn't have this book here called Dealing with Mortality, A Skeptic's Guide. And I just found out recently when I went back and was researching this subject to write this. And I think it's pretty cool. I want to check out the book. I think it's, I didn't realize at the time that he was even a skeptic. And now looking back at it, it's pretty cool to I don't know, realize that. Anyways, while we were on our little hiatus there, the Iron Chariot asked me to clarify something, and I want to say that when I say that if you have to turn to religion, then that's probably better. I mean that if you are in a debilitating depression where you can't leave, you can't work, you can't do anything, and or suicidal, it's probably better to turn to whatever's going to work than to be stuck in those states or potentially kill yourself. So that's kind of what I meant by that. And but it is really interesting to see how these topics intermesh. That's why I wanted to share that original link on phobiasabout.com or .about.com or something like that, is because the two subjects really intertwine and have a lot to do with each other.
And all the links that we talk about here tonight in this broadcast are going to be available in the description below both take 1 and take 2. I'm probably going to combine them in video editor later, so it's just one video. But they will be available to everyone after we are done broadcasting.
Yeah, I highly suggest you guys take it out, especially if you guys check it out, especially if you're an atheist or secular person and you're dealing with any of these problems. Even if you're just looking for, yeah, even if you're just looking for something interesting to research a little bit, they're very interesting links, and they're just really great. Especially that Yale open course is really great. Does anybody else have any questions about it or any stories about their own personal problems with this or takes on it?
Yeah, I certainly had a similar lifelong affiliation with this particular phobia. I would, stay up every night from age 8 to, say, about a year or so ago. Every night, just with constant worry. And that's when I learned about generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and how I could better control my mental state. And just by practicing mindfulness as I do and taking a few prescriptions, I've been able to really turn over a new leaf with that. And I now have this story in my head of, well, first transhumanism as sort of a delaying mechanism for this, and secondly, the idea of like a possible infinite space-time, where all events and all matter and all possibilities will over Google plexes of years or so either happen again or have the same sort of consciousness again. So I'm currently of the opinion where I could be some sort of other being at some point, just from a physics standpoint. But until then, I'm just trying to be as calm as possible about it. So that's my current state of affairs.
Yeah, I too explored a lot of those things, and really, they kind of helped me cope. That was more of my I felt like my woo-woo stage. Like, oh well, if the universe is infinite, then there's a chance that everything can happen again, coalesce. As long as it's infinite, there's a chance. But infinite, I don't know. There's obviously ways you can argue that. Like, even if it's infinite, what if it's an infinite expansion and it never contracts again, and it just becomes so big and dissipated that nothing ever coalesces and forms again, but it still is infinite. It might be infinite, just not in the state that would give way to you coming around again. But either way, I mean, I got to the point where even thinking of that infinite possibility was better than nothing, because at least my particles that I once had were still existent in some form. I no longer hold on to that, because these particles weren't mine before I got them. I'm just holding on to them temporarily. Who am I to claim these as my own? They're not mine. They're just me temporarily. They belonged to somebody else before. They belonged to something else before. And for me to have the selfish thought on that and just to cling on to my own misunderstanding of reality, you know what I mean? It's like just to make myself feel fuzzy. It's like that's kind of how I got over it. But
I don't think it's a selfish or fuzzy way to look at it at all. I think the relevant physics, even with the big freeze as the most plausible end of the universe right now, it would be for some sort of eventual reconciliation of that, be it in the multiverse or via some sort of uh, multidimensional event. So, my and the thought about claiming molecules, I certainly in the human body, your consciousness is the molecules of your brain, but uh, there have been very, very many molecules to have made up that brain, and they will be all over the place at some point in distant time. Um, and the idea that they couldn't come back together at any point is to be yours. It doesn't. Who cares if you're claiming them as your molecules? It doesn't seem like any sort of a psychological deficit to me. So, yeah, that's just thoughts.
I just have to ask real quick on the current topic. How exactly, and I'm ignorant of this, so this was legitimately a question. First of all, how exactly does this current topic differ from reincarnation? And secondly, if it doesn't differ from reincarnation, then how can someone hold said beliefs without without invoking the existence of some kind of supernatural or some sort of religious belief?
Now, from a physical perspective, we're not engaging any of these ideas like souls or anything like that. We're solely referring to the physical mechanisms that create a consciousness, and as opposed to any dogmatic reincarnation ideas, um, the idea that a consciousness could exist again just by the sheer vastness of the universe and not really having any sort of thought as to in what form or what place or anything like that. I don't think has the same sort of religious connotations that people would often put on such an idea.
Well,
Well, okay, so put it this way, Iron Chariot. In reincarnation, you have a soul that is passed on from one living being to the next. And what we're talking about, there's no soul, there's no continuance. There's a break in the chain, and it, over time will come back together, whether it's all of the same molecules or not. I mean, my feeling on that is, yeah, it's going to be if it does happen, it would be a perfect representation of me, but the break in my consciousness isn't, it's not no longer me. Once I'm gone, I'm gone. Whether all my molecules come back together and it's exactly the same and I have exactly the same thoughts and experiences, it's not me. It's like the transporter thing. Would you go through a transporter if it broke you down and rebuilt you and it was basically a clone of you? I would not until I was at death's door would I go through a transporter, because it's not really me. I mean, yeah, it is very, very close. It's virtually me, and that might be good enough, but for me, that's not good enough until I'm at death's door.
Well, the idea of the current representation of your consciousness being extirpated in favor of a new consciousness in your own head, to me, doesn't really affect anything, because the difference, while it may exist, wouldn't be in any way relevant to your personal experience, because while that consciousness may be eliminated, you personally will experience the new consciousness, whether or not you have memory of the old consciousness. In the teleporter example, in the long-term example, certainly you'd have no idea of what you were before, because that's just not how biology tends to work. But I don't think the idea of having to be the exact same person is really what I was going for, as much as the idea that some sort of consciousness could reappear.
I kind of see what you guys are saying. One thing that you have to kind of contemplate, and I feel like we're kind of getting off track a little bit, but just to bring up this last point, is that we are operating individually on our own understanding of consciousness, how it is. And they're still working on understanding exactly what consciousness is and what our perceived reality is. They've discussed the hippocampus orchestrating all of our senses and creating our mind, and what theists would call our soul, because, I mean, that's about as close as you're going to get. But our consciousness and subconsciousness being orchestrated 100% of the time by our hippocampus and a couple other smaller sections of the brain. And if you take that into account, when the hippocampus will be turned off and or a new one would be created, or a new brain is made, that's another instance made. It's like opening tabs on a browser. So all the tabs are parented to the same original browser, but they're completely different tabs. Now, they're not slave to that browser, so to speak, They can operate in and of themselves. You can drag them out to their own window, and they're operating, and they all came from the original browser, but they're not the original browser. They have their own tasks. They have their mind of their own, and I think keeping that in mind in a transporter scenario, my opinion, the new person wouldn't exactly be you. In a copy and paste sort of mechanism, it couldn't. But that's given the information that I know. I mean, next year we can discover another huge part of our understanding of consciousness and how that relates, and that might completely just destroy our understanding as it sits now. But getting back on thanatophobia, I could see how in a transporter scenario anyone would be not only conscientious of that decision, but would be apprehensive to undergo that procedure, mainly because, well, I mean, you're dying, and in effect, I know that, being recreated in that scenario, you go through that transporter and everything, that, I mean, as we currently understand it, you would be gone. I knew you would be created, but it would be different. And I would like to move on to our current event if possible. Matt, I shared the controls with you, so you should be able to present to everyone if you wanted to talk about your current event.
That's not my job, is it? Isn't Buck doing current events?
That's me.
Did you have a current event for tonight? I thought, Matt, you posted that Gallup link. That's what I thought was the current event.
I didn't post
that. That was me that posted that.
Okay, so let's see. Let me pull that up real quick. My apologies.
Right.
I'm not that sorry, but all right, hold on. All right, it was socialist presidential candidate's least appealing one.
Yeah, right.
Let me pull that up real quick. Hold on.
All right.
Is that everyone?
Let me know. All right. So, from the Heretic Cleric news desk, this is Sir Juilot reporting. This article here shows something that's been in the news in the recent week, that atheists are no longer the worst possible minority to be in order to be held electable by Americans, and this has been making the rounds all over. But I liked this part of the chart. This first part has really been the part that's been making the most news. Just saying how many people think one way or the other. And while I find that to be somewhat interesting, I like to see the trend on that. And so if you go to the bottom chart on this page, you can see that... Oh, can you go to the bottom chart on the page? Right. That's next one. Right. Yeah. So you can see how generationally these opinions are being formed. And what I'd like to point out is that the atheist category is growing by leaps and bounds, faster than any other category except socialists. And it's interesting that the two that were on the bottom of the list on top are the two that are the fastest growing. So it's not really a good picture of the direction we're going, I think, this chart up here. Because the chart on top, I mean. Because as you can see from the chart on bottom, it's that's not really the direction we're going. You can see that, for instance, some of the religions are going down in terms of acceptance, and you can see that, it's weird to see that the black candidates were 95% in 50 to 64 and 90% in 18 to 29. I don't know what that says about us, but um, it's certainly part of the Europeanization of American politics that has been slowly emerging, where we become we have more federal programs to help provide for people, where we have less of a need to have religion-based leaders and laws, and where we can sort of have a more varied outlook on these issues. So, for that report, I'll now turn it over to others for any thoughts.
All your thoughts are belong to us. No, I'm just kidding. The trends that you highlighted are fairly interesting. I do think that we are moving in a forward direction. It seems like secularism or humanism, or atheism or anti-theism, depending on which label on the spectrum you want to call yourself nowadays. But I think secularists in general, not only making a rise, but an exponential rise, because there are so many secularists as of right now that are masquerading as the religious folk, and as it becomes less and less of a hostile environment, and it becomes more and more welcoming for those to be secular, and not for fear of social or socio political reprisal, we will see a lot more secularists out and about, if you will. So, what do you think, Iron Chariot? Or sorry, Matt. No, you go ahead.
So what? Sorry, I was just skipping around on tables. I couldn't follow everything. But so, was it saying that socialists are becoming more negative, or is it just staying the same?
Socialists are becoming less of a pariah, is what I was saying. It's just that they are currently the less electable than atheists in total. But actually, their acceptance is growing faster.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to see. So I wonder if the stigma for socialism is tied to like the propaganda around like Obama, however he says, he's a socialist. You know what I mean? I just wonder if that mindset has kind of affected that at all.
I think there's some Soviet hangover amongst the older generations as well.
Well, my point is like that. Obviously, that's happening, but I'm looking at the younger people. Like they wouldn't have that stigma. You know what I'm saying? But
right.
As you said, it's getting better. So.
Yeah, and you can see amongst the young people, it's 70%, and amongst the old people, it's 34%. I mean, it's really just that Cold War mindset amongst the elderly that's sort of holding that back, and I think that's the same mindset that creates the whole Obama's a socialist stupidities, and as such, I feel like going forward, you can have someone like Bernie Sanders really start making some hay. I don't know if right now that could happen, but I think going forward, sure, you can have that sort of different outlook on things.
Okay. Well, I think that was very well put. That was a very good current event. Now I believe it's time for our next segment, which is spinning the wheel. Matt, are you ready? Matt is ready. Matt is going to get the wheel right now. This is the part of the show where we spin a wheel, and we take a scripture, whichever it lands on. We pull the scripture off the wheel. Matt reads it, and then we laugh a little bit, talk about it. All right, ready, Matt? And spin the wheel. And the scripture, please.
All right, this time I'm not letting it leave the frame, so you guys know I'm not cheating, all right? See it?
We're not live anymore. No, I'm just kidding. No, go ahead. The scripture, please.
You see, I'm not cheating. Hold on, I gotta open it.
Did someone call you out on cheating before? Did Moose Gal?
No,
did Moose Gal say, "Oh, I went out of the frame for a second"?
No, but it was just too uncanny. No, it's right here. Come on. Okay. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. Leviticus 25:44. That's an old one, but whatever. We're gonna get. Not all of them could be gems, you know.
Yeah, not all of them can be perfect as the last couple. The last couple were pretty much on point.
Last ones I was cheating. This time I was serious.
Yeah, apparently you rigged it. You rigged it. You pulled the ace. You pulled the ace. Now this one, we've had a couple of. Actually, have they all been Leviticus so far?
Well, you know, a lot of these things are. I don't know. I got.
You put the scriptures on the wheel, Matt.
They're not all. I mean, a lot of the good ones are. You know what I mean? Where else are you gonna go? You know. I'm checking right now. Hold on.
Okay. Well, do we have context? I mean, I know that a lot of people would say, you're taking that scripture out of context, considering Leviticus is like the.
Yeah, I don't have the context, but that's why I gave the number, so you can.
Yeah, you can look it
go
up.
And check it out if you want, but yeah, you can own slaves, so there you go.
Yep, slavery is cool in the Bible. That's not the only one. That's not the only scripture that mentions slavery. There are many scriptures, not only on how to, why it's okay, but the process of owning slaves, how to financially, economically deal with slaves, how to punish them under certain provisions. So that's just one of the many that we have on slavery.
How to keep them in bondage by marrying them off and holding their wife and children as hostage.
That's right, and then in some cases, especially killing the adulterers and adulteresses, because if the slaves have sex with each other, they need to be put to death.
I have a legitimate beef and question about slavery in the Bible, and I'm gonna try to word it. You say no.
We'll judge the legitimacy.
I said, uh-oh.
Oh, no, I'm gonna try and word it as PC as possible. Given like BA said that it is not only condoned, but the rules for owning and trading and buying and selling slaves are laid out in the Bible. It leads me to wonder how any ethnic group that the Bible did not favor, ethnic or gender group that the Bible did not favor, can practice such a religion when the religion is the main source of the oppression in a lot of different cultures and genders' history.
Ooh, I know this is normally Buck's area, but I have to jump in here if that's okay. Okay, so two things. One, rhetoric. They'll claim any verse that they can claim as being rhetorical or being part of a fable. That's one opposition that I've seen quite a bit when you bring up this verse in the Bible. Oh, well, that's rhetorical, since God's most important book, an instruction manual for how to live, would be full of rhetoric. And then the second one The second one that I have heard and continue to read online is, oh, it's okay because the community at the time, because society at the time, that's where we were in the world. That's where everything was. I mean, that's crap. That's like, we should continue to follow this archaic millenniums old book just because at one point it was relevant. No, there were scientific documents, old scientific documents that claim that mathematically the Earth is at the center of the universe, and we have mathematically disproven that because we continue to get smarter. But instead of continuing to get smarter, some people want to go back to the way that some of our goat-herding brethren are living today.
Well, my question wasn't so much like what are the rebuttals to that, but why would somebody who was oppressed and put down and treated like less of a human being by that text want to rebut those things? Not necessarily what would they say, but why?
Oh, okay.
Why? Would they want to?
Why? Thanatophobia. It's perfect. It actually ties in perfectly with tonight's theme. Thanatophobia, or an unreasonable fear of death, because there's so much promise in the Bible that cannot be either substantiated or proven, that they live on those promises. They live on those empty ideologies and the hope, because that's what religion has been used for so much in history. We can look back and you can see the cogs turning in the wheels of history and in the machine of history and historical societies, and we can see how it was used to make the peasants feel like there was something better, how to keep them working harder because they would be rewarded. You're going to follow the rules that I tell you, because if you don't, you're going to go to hell. That's stuff like that. It's the fear of death and torture for eternity that continues to make people follow those rules, which exactly was many of us, even here in this group, were under those ideologies at one point and had that fear, had that fear of death, but also the promise of doing what you're told and atoning for your sins will let you see your family, will let you live in paradise. You'll have your own castle in paradise, we're told. But we have all come to the conclusion that that is not the case for so many different reasons, and it's that thanatophobia that kept us there. It's great that we all of us have had so many different resources to allow us to move on from that point, kind of like Matt's one of Matt's resources was Peter Steele. Matt, would you like to discuss Peter Steele?
Yeah. So for the Atheist Spotlight this week, I chose Peter Steele. He was the lead singer of the band Typo Negative. He had a couple other bands before that, but I was turned on to him by Typo Negative. I started listening to him when I was a young child, probably 12 years old. He had a popular video on MTV called Black Number One, and I didn't really listen to the music then. I just thought it was creepy and cool, but it kind of the band stuck with me as I grew up, and the more I developed, the more the music meant to me, and I understood more of it. Anyways, he died, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago. It was right after I had become atheist, and a couple of my favorite lead singers died in that time. But anyways, I didn't even know at the time he was an atheist. Actually, I kind of assumed he was, but I just realized today, doing my research, I kind of wanted to do a band, and I was looking at my favorite bands. Actually, I'm wearing the shirt of Typo Negative right now, and I was going through all my favorite bands, lead singers, trying to find an atheist one, and I actually had another one at first, but then I found this one. But I thought his story was kind kind of good for this episode because he died, and a couple years before he died, his mother died, and he ended up kind of going back to Christianity because he couldn't deal with it. And so he wasn't an atheist when he died, but I still consider him an atheist. Music has helped me a lot in my life, understand things and realize that I'm not alone on subjects, and calm me. And I don't know, it's like a lot of the music I listen to, you think it would have the complete opposite effect, because my favorite type of I like a lot of different stuff, but my favorite types of music are blues and doom metal, and neither of those are very happy, but for some reason. Do you have something to say, BA?
Oh, I was just going to say that's an interesting combination.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of other things. I like techno, drum and bass, stuff like that. But those are probably my two favorite, blues and doom metal. But it's just hearing other people's stories and how they deal with it kind of helps me cope with my own. So if I kind of thought I would read some quotes on him because I thought they were kind of relevant. When interviewed when he was an atheist, he said, "I've always been a very depressed person, but that's only one side of me. You know, it makes me feel better when I can express my depression, my anger, my frustration through music." And he calls it sonic therapy. And like I said, this guy is a metal singer. I mean, you're not going to get any great revelations out of this, but it's just nice to hear other people's point of view. And he also said in an interview, "There are no atheists in foxholes," they say, and I was a foxhole atheist for a long time, but after going through a midlife crisis and having many things change very quickly, it made me realize my mortality. And when you start to think about death, you start to think about what's after it, and then you start hoping there is a God. For me, it was a frightening thought to go nowhere. I also can't believe that people like Stalin and Hitler are going to go to the same place as Mother Teresa. So that ties into the coping mechanisms, and I also had a fear of the unknown and there being nothing after death at one point, but I was able to cope with that. But for him, it was just a little bit too strong, and he had to go back to Christianity. And he explains that when he says, "After my mother passed away last year, a couple of other things happened. I pretty much got back to my faith. I was born Roman Catholic, believe it or not. I go to church on Sunday, and I do read the Bible, but I don't read it as a how to live your life book. I read it as if I have a question, I can open any page. If you're open-minded, you will get the answer from a passage, and you will get a different answer if you read the same passage, but it will still be just as worthy." Basically, he's saying it's a big book of multiple choice, and I don't agree with that, but it worked. It helped him through a tough time, and whatever. I'm not going to judge people for that kind of thing. So, I wish he didn't go back, but he did. But that's what happens when stuff gets tough. You know what I mean? You turn to coping mechanisms. I don't know if anybody has anything to put in on that.
Oh, I was going to say about his quote about, being a foxhole atheist, and they do say that it's the whole there is no foxhole atheist. When you're at the end of your rope, everyone is godly, and I completely disagree. I've been in a few foxholes myself, and I've always, for as long as I would, but long before I was in the military, I was an atheist.
I disagree as well. I don't think. I think that emphasized my point that he didn't turn to Christianity while he was in the foxhole. You know what I mean? It kind of took. I don't know how to describe it. Like, he stayed an atheist through tough times, but it just finally wore at him, and he was just he cracked. You know what I mean? That can happen to a lot of people. I just wanted to emphasize that when shit gets really tough, that's when you're at your most vulnerable. You know what I'm saying? And you can turn to things like that.
Right, and it's very, it's very comforting to think that, I'm serving my country, and I would be serving God. That, in this sacrifice that I'm giving, that I would go to a place of paradise, regardless of, which pantheon you're praying to. It's nice to think that you would go somewhere like that, but I never had that ideology. It was actually kind of comforting to me to think that if something were to happen, that I would be completely at peace, that the noise would be over, so to speak, that, all of what was going on around me, all of what could happen and has happened, would be over because I love living in sin. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't want to go to hell because I'm so sinful. Ah!
Yeah, on that note, I just want to say on the Open Yale course, they discuss that exact thing. They discuss infinity and they discuss nothingness and how nothingness isn't a bad thing. People look at it like it's a bad thing. It's not bad or good. Nothing can't be bad or good. So when you pass away, you won't know bad or good. You won't know anything. You won't feel anything. You won't feel bad or good. And that's why I feel part of my I feel that certain instances suicide is okay because there's some instances where death is a preferable state than the negative,
I'd like to say that I don't condone. I don't necessarily condone suicide. What I'm saying is that I think your point that you're trying to make is that there are situations where, just like you would euthanize your dog for being too sick or to be beaten and broken and wounded, that there would come a point where, pulling the plug on someone that's sitting in a machine that's been in a coma for 5 years and has no quality of life, that at that point removing the plug and ending it, or at any point that person wishes to, is one thing. But I don't think that because someone's going through a hard time, they get that thanatophobia, they get that fear of death, but they have a greater fear of the temporary problem that they're in. So
No, that's not what I meant at all. But I wouldn't even liken it to a sick dog. It would have to be a lot worse than a sick dog situation. But
well, that's why I brought up the coma. I said, someone's in a coma, quality of life, there's no quality of life, blah 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 blah. That's why I said all that. That's what I was talking about. Your point. I think the point you were trying to make was that. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. But I feel like a person should have autonomy over whether they choose that. Like in that situation, I would want to decide. Like it's hard to describe. Like if I'm laying on my deathbed, I would like the ability to decide to end it quicker or lay there and waste away and be in pain. You know what I'm saying? That's basically the scenario I would think of. Yeah.
What do you think, Buck?
Well, my grandpa had Parkinson's, and he had diabetes to the point where his foot had to be amputated, and he was going to dialysis. And so he called the family to all come in for one last visit. And when we all left, he took a bunch of pills and ended it. So this whole conversation about when should people just toss it in is one that really is part of my family history. I was recently talking about this with Dad. That his dad was the one that did it, and he says, "Oh, that was a great thing you did, because then you didn't have to put anyone through the trouble of caring for him, and he was really sick anyways." And my thought is, if you can mentally bear the thought of killing yourself, and you are not going to be providing any other societal usefulness along with your current pain, I don't think it needs to be the point of where you're in a coma necessarily. Certainly.
Well, no, I didn't mean that you can only commit suicide if you're in a coma. I think everyone should be able to choose their life and how that works, but I think that there are so many resources available that a lot of people turn to that permanent solution for their temporary problems.
Yeah, there's definitely a point there, and I didn't want to make that at all. And I totally agree with Buck, and I totally agree with you. And real quick, Buck, I just want to say on this, I totally agree with your situation, because my feeling is if you're 50 years or older, you've lived long enough to realize where your life is going and what good you have in this world and whether you want to leave or not. That's kind of my feeling. Anything other than that is pretty sad, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people, certainly suicide is most prevalent amongst those that shouldn't be doing it. And certainly that's why suicide prevention, suicide watch, knowing about depression as an illness are so important, because that is a huge burden on society when we have kids killing themselves because of untreated illnesses. Um, and I think part of the conversation we have about suicide in general is colored by the perceptions we have of suicide from that angle of it. I think that going into the other direction with the euthanasia end of suicide, I think the discussion has to be not how can we prevent it, but more of a philosophical discussion as to when should it occur.
I feel like we just had this conversation the other day, Iron, Apoplectic. I feel like the three of us had this conversation last week. It was very Gattaca. I don't know, was it before we started recording, but I remember talking about Gattaca, maybe Orphan's Run.
I think we did. No, I mentioned, I think I mentioned Logan's Run. Yeah,
Logan's
I think
Run.
we did, dude.
Yeah, I think we had this conversation last week. Anyways.
No, we were talking about putting people in incinerators.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Never mind. Okay, I know exactly. It was you and me. We were talking about this the other day. We were just
it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And
we were having a hangouts, and we were just talking about stuff. And we talked about Logan's Run and Gattaca and incinerating people once they reached so far in life. It was crazy. It was off the chain. Sorry, I didn't mean to overshadow your point that you were making there.
Don't worry about that. No, I feel like it's an issue where as we progress as a society, it will be more continually discussed, and there will be, in this public discussion, a push for legality, and it'll be another civil rights movement, very much like the one we just had for marriage equality, and several movements before it. And we'll, as we tend up to do, end up with the progressive option going forward. There are certainly many countries and organizations around the world that have already settled on the euthanasia option for whenever you'd want to take advantage of it. Well, not whenever, certainly amongst youth and depressed, that's going to be a different situation. But, amongst the people that it would be useful for.
Right, I can see what you're I see what you're talking about there, and there are a lot of societies, especially European, mostly some of the older first worlds that have really put a lot more thought and dedication behind this ideology. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Iron?
I do, not necessarily about suicide, but just about thanatophobia. As Matt said in the beginning, it's something that plagues nearly everybody at one time or another. And I can't remember hearing this, and I don't remember where exactly I heard it, and I'm sure it's been said by multiple famous people. But that death is the great cosmic joke, because we that are living mourn the dead, and we that are living worry about dying so much. But the dying person, or the dead person, sorry, the dead person is for the first time ever experiencing true peace and tranquility. We're the ones worrying about it. That person that's dead doesn't care. Um, I think that's humorous.
Yeah, I was trying to say that earlier, is that death isn't good or bad, and that course touches on that. It's the state of nothing, you know. Um, so yeah, I think it was pretty amazing. We actually did stay on topic, even if suicide seemed a little bit off topic. The more you think about it, the more you'll realize it is on topic, because of dying with dignity and avoiding pain and suffering is a abnormal fear of people. But anyways, so yeah, I guess that's it for the show, right?
Yeah. So tonight we covered thanatophobia. We covered the unnatural, well, phobia being a little more extreme. So the more extreme fear of death, and the concept of death as a little more abstract than just the direct death itself. Everything beyond and involving the term. Um, so. Everyone. It was awesome talking about thanatophobia. I'm really glad that we were able to do it. We discussed Peter Steele. We discussed Mr. Steele. We discussed he was our atheist spotlight tonight, so make sure you actually go check out Typo Negative. Mr. Steele has passed on, so make sure you check out Typo Negative, all their stuff. We'll post links in the description below. I'll also make sure that we put links in the description below the video. I'm probably going to close this into one video, but in the video of all the stuff that Matt was talking about a little while ago, all the links that he took us to, the philosophy links, the videos. I'm going to make sure to put those in the links below. So everybody, thank you for tuning in, and that will conclude our show. So everyone, I want to say good night and thank you for tuning in to Reality's Breakdown.
See you guys.
Deuces.